The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, is a travel boycott of the U.S. a boon to Canadian tourism? Then we'll meet a former undercover FBI agent and a Canadian journalist about their new book on exposing America's most dangerous hate groups. That's ahead on The Agenda. Canadians are making their feelings known about threats coming from the Trump administration by pulling back on trips south of the border. But is the U.S. government taking notice? And while it might seem like an advantage for Canadian tourism, businesses near the border are taking a hit. What are the lasting effects of this situation? Let's ask. In Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Terry Dale, President and CEO of the United States Tour Operators Association. In the nation's capital, Amy Butcher, Vice President of Stakeholder Relations and Engagement for the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. In Sarnia, Ontario, Tanya Lee, owner of Blue Water Bridge Duty Free and President of the Frontier Duty Free Association. And with us in studio, Frederic Dimanche, Professor and Director of the Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism Management at Toronto Metropolitan University. Welcome, Frederic, in studio. And for those joining us on the line, let's start by just seeing how much U.S. travel has been affected since 2024. Road trips over the border into the U.S. dropped by an estimated 32% compared to March 2024, according to Statistics Canada. Air travel declined 13.5% year over year. According to a recent Abacus poll, 62% of Canadians say they'll avoid traveling to the U.S. this year. And according to the U.S. Travel Association, a sustained decline of more than 30% in Canadian visitors could translate to more than $6 billion in losses to the American economy in 2025. Frederic, I'm going to move to you first. Why is this all happening?
Well,
good question.
There's a good question. There are several factors. So obviously, this started with the investiture of President Trump. So, and you remember what he said in January. He said a few things that were not very nice to the Canadians. The Canadians felt disrespected. He called our Prime Minister a governor. He was talking about the 51st state in Canada. So that was already one thing that Canadians didn't like. A second thing was obviously the tariffs, the economic war. So it turned out to be not just towards Canada, but also towards Mexico. And then it was a world economic war, basically. Everybody is taking a hit as a result of this. And then there are some other factors, I would say. Also, the low Canadian dollar as compared to the American dollar is a contributing factor, I believe. And in the recent weeks, we have seen in the news a lot of issues regarding people at the border. People being afraid of being detained, people being afraid of having difficulty crossing the border. So when you put all those factors together, that explains the big decline.
All right. Terry, I'm curious, as Frederic had mentioned, Canadians have had a visceral reaction to comments like Governor, the 51st state comments. But when did you start noticing this turn, sort of turning into a real decline?
Well, I started hearing from our members about 2.5 months ago that there was a pause, a hesitation, shall we say, from the Canadian market. And we understand. And first and foremost, let me just say to your audience, we get it. We are sorry that we're in this circumstance. You're our best neighbors and our best market here in the U.S. And we regret that we're in this situation that we are today. But we will get through this cycle. And if there's anything I'm certain of, it's uncertainty. This cycle will continue to be uncertain. And I try and always put myself in the other person's shoes. And when I do that, and I think if your prime minister had declared the U.S. as the 11th new province of Canada, how would we have responded? And I think we know the answer to that. So we get it. We're sorry. We value as our friend and partner, and we'll get through this together.
I am curious, Terry, there is this stereotype that the neighbors to the north here were nice. I am curious, are you surprised by sort of maybe the kind of the stance that Canadians have taken that, we're not going to be, some say, are not putting up with this?
I am, and I'm not. Because honestly, in my capacity of president of USTOA, I travel the world. And honestly, I have always said the Canadians are the nicest people in the world. And I mean that genuinely. So there's a certain element of surprise, but then when I step back and say, but I understand the response that you're having under these circumstances. So, am I a little surprised? Maybe a little, but I understand why you're offended. And I get it. We get it. We just have to hold on.
Fair enough. All right, Amy, let's talk economics here. The tourism industry is intricately connected between Canada and the U.S. What's the biggest worry economically for Canada?
Well, it's twofold. Number one, the U.S. market is our biggest international visitor market into Canada. And so we echo the same sentiment that we understand this is an issue between administrations. It's not between our peoples. We talk in Canada about elbows up, but as a tourism sector, we also talk about arms wide open. And so the economic impact is one, we're seeing a decline in U.S. visitors, and we want to reassure American visitors that they continue to be welcomed. And we also want to remind Canadians that we are a welcoming people. We are open to receiving visitors from all over the world. And again, this is a fight between administrations. Canada is ready to welcome the world as we enter into our tourism season. But at the same time, we're also seeing, this renewed sense of pride. And just like choosing local is an act of patriotism, choosing to visit Canada and staying in Canada, we're seeing as equally as an act of patriotism. So what we're seeing from our members is increased bookings. Canadians are making a conscious decision to choose Canada this year.
All right, Tanya, before we get into the sort of the impacts that you've seen, I am curious, can you describe for us how duty-free works at border crossings?
Most definitely. So many people may not know that we are all small, family-owned duty-free shops, mom-and-pop shops on the border. We have 32 duty-frees across Canada in rural border towns, and there are 10 here in Ontario alone. And in some of these border communities, we are big job creators. We are the economic anchors in these small towns. One of the facts that people may also not know is that we are export businesses. We can only sell to travelers going into the USA. So in times like this, we cannot pivot. We don't have a domestic market that we can sell into. We can't take advantage of domestic tourism. So we're kind of like the forefront of this terror war.
And I imagine online shops don't exist.
We do not have online shopping at all. We can only sell to consumers going into the U.S.
All right. Tell me a little bit about how your business and other businesses are managing with the downturn in road border crossings.
So we are seeing industry-wide a decline of 40 to 60%. You will see in our stores in BC, in New Brunswick, they are harder hit. They could be anywhere down from 40 to 80%. So short-term, everyone is looking at the hours that they're opening. They're looking at cutting back on shifts for our staff, cutting back on expenses, most definitely, but we're really concerned more about what the long-term effects would be like in this industry.
When you talk about long-term, you don't have to look that far to sort of look at the latest disruptions in COVID. I'm curious, were there similar disruptions during COVID to what we're seeing now, or is this perhaps worse?
It's an eerie, similar feeling for us. So some of our stores were closed for 20 months during COVID. And during that time, the owners would put money back into their businesses. They took out SIBA loans. Some of them are still paying off these loans. And it's been very scary for us as an industry. We all watched Easter weekend really closely just to see as a benchmark where we would be at. I know my store alone was down 30% versus the year before. So, you start to bring these things into effect. And we sell to a lot of Canadian products in our store. So we have a lot of Canadian suppliers. And we're concerned that if this continues long term, we're going to start to lose our supply chain. And once we start to do that and there's a trickle-down effect, we may not get back this industry. And this is a viable industry.
Terry, you're in Florida, a big tourist attraction for Canadians, of course. What economic repercussions are you seeing a few months into this trend?
Well, it's significant. And we expect that's going to continue. But what we want to focus on is how do we bridge this, which is why we created this coalition of all of these travel associations here in the U.S. and also the Canadian Association of Tour Operators to start figuring out how do we message to our population that we are welcoming to Canadians, and Canadians are welcoming us to your country, but we are stronger together. But it's going to be a significant impact, and any and everything we can do in our toolbox, we need to do. And part of that, and key to this, is these travel associations are lobbying entities. So I will be in D.C. June 3rd and 4th with my membership, knocking on legislators' doors, telling this story and encouraging them to do what they can do to do the right thing, to restore this because of the economic harm that it's having on both Canada and the U.S. So it's really rallying the troops, telling the story, and sticking with it. We cannot let up, and we won't.
I am curious, what are you hearing from your members directly? We got an idea from Tanya, sort of the businesses, the dire situations, these are family businesses. What does it look like with tour operators? How dire is the situation?
Well, yeah, our tour operators are very diversified. So I can't speak with specificity other than what I heard at my board meeting last week in Turkey. And their call centers have paused. So very few Canadian calls are coming in, which obviously is a direct reflection of what we're going through. Now, how that translates for this season, we're concerned, but it's kind of a wait and see attitude because as I'm sure you folks know, as well as I do, we wake up in the morning and we find a different message coming from the administration about the tariff scenario. We pause it for 90 days. We're going to lessen or increase it, whether it's on China or other parts of the world. So nothing is harder for businesses, and especially small businesses on the border, to have a business plan and to plan for the future because uncertainty is all that we know at this point. So it's a tough scenario. And, when you asked about COVID, it does have some resemblance of what we went through with COVID. And never did I think we would face something similar, but it does have some similar feelings to what we went through with the pandemic.
All right. I want to get everyone's take on a comment that was made yesterday in response to a media question about the decline in travel from Canada. U.S. President Trump said, it's not a big deal. Frederick, what happens if this decline lasts well into his term?
I think, unfortunately, the decline is going to last because, we were just talking about the tariffs. It's not just a matter of tariffs. It's a matter of reputation. And the reputation of the U.S. has been damaged, and I think it's going to be for a long time, unfortunately. And it's not coming from Canada only. We know that the reputation has been affected in Europe as well, in some other countries. So we see all the travel and tourism trends going down towards going to the United States. So it will affect, maybe it won't affect Mr. Trump and the overall economy of the United States, but it will affect some states for sure. If you think about Florida, if you think about Arizona, if you think about some of the border states, they will be very much affected, a lot more than the overall U.S. economy.
Amy, I want to get your take on that. Those comments, it's not a big deal. I imagine you have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think it speaks to the importance of telling our story around tourism. And what people probably don't know is that Canadians outspend Americans in the U.S. significantly. Canadians spend about $20 billion in the U.S. Compared to 13 that Americans spend in Canada. So there is a spending deficit there. But as others have said, it's important to continue to tell that story with legislators and decision makers, which we do in Canada, but especially in those border states, which are going to be hit really hard.
Tanya, your thoughts on those comments?
I have very strong thoughts on that. It is a big deal. It is a big deal to these rural border communities that rely on cross-border traffic. It's important to our small-town prosperity. And, it's important because we are so integrated on the border with our border towns on the other side. We've had shared traditions and shared events that we go to. In Sarnia and Port Huron, we would float down the river together. And then you're starting to disrupt this. And that's the heartbreaking part of all of this.
Terry, I want to get your take on that as well.
Well, I only agree with my colleagues here on the panel. The reputational image, our brand as a country that welcomes people from around the world is and will be damaged. So we have got a tremendous amount of work to do to try and restore that. There's no simple solution in how one goes about doing that, but we recognize how challenging this is. And so we've got our work cut out for us, but it is a big deal. Regardless of what our president may say and dismiss the economic impact that this has, it's a big deal. Yeah. And we as an industry, we recognize it, we see it, we feel it, and we just have a lot of work to do.
Frederick, that comment that Tanya made, that image of floating down the river, just how important these relationships have been sort of nurtured and taken care of for so many years. I am curious, how are they coming apart? And is there, what is required to sort of patch this friendship and relationship?
It's like any relationship. It's a matter of trust, first of all, and respect. And so when that trust has been shut down, basically, it's going to take a long time to recover that trust. So it's true for, neighbors working on their lawn. It's true for countries' neighbors and travelers going across. So I think it's going to take a long time, frankly. And as, my colleague said, it's going to be a lot of work for the U.S. tourism industry to compensate, to work towards reestablishing that trust with international travelers, Canadians and others. And it's a lot of work and a lot of time ahead of us.
Amy, I am curious about potentially what advantages there might be for the Canadian economy. If Canadian tourism money stays in Canada, is there a concern that we'll run out of capacity or that flights and hotel prices will be driven up? Is there a negative consequence potentially from some of this?
So there is tremendous growth potential in the tourism sector in Canada. We expect to outpace economic growth over the next few years. We've set some important growth strategy goals for 2030. And so our operators and our members are ready. Now, governments, it's important that governments pay attention because we do need ongoing support in terms of infrastructure investments, in terms of faster visa entry, in terms of workplace gaps with our skilled workforce. But I will say that this renewed commitment to Canadian tourism is something we're really encouraged by because, as we've been saying to the world, we have so much to offer. Visitors are really looking for more unique experiences, and Canada has those in spades, right? We have mountains, oceans, Indigenous tourism. We have big cities, small towns, and what's important about the tourism sector is that it exists in every single part of the country. There is no community that's untouched by tourism. And so by looking at how do we strengthen our country, how do we create more vibrant, more connected, more prosperous communities, that starts with tourism. A great place to live is also a great place to visit. And so we are encouraged by Canadians looking inwards and choosing Canada. And we're really looking forward to the years ahead in terms of how can we all work together to strengthen our sector and really tell that collective story of what it brings to Canada.
Frederick, how can Canada gain from this?
Well, like we said, domestic tourism is obviously going to be something. I think Canadians may be more likely to travel and explore Canada again, maybe. But let's not forget that the Canadians love to go abroad as well, and they will continue to. And tour operators, travel agents tell us that there is renewed interest in some, destinations, in the Far East, in Southeast Asia, in Europe, etc. Another opportunities we have, I think, is to bring to Canada the travelers who were thinking about traveling to the United States. If you want to have a North American experience and you don't want to go to the United States, well, maybe you're going to be thinking about coming to Canada as well. So I think we're going to see this summer a surge of European travel, for example, coming to visit Canada. And we have to take advantage of that.
I am curious, sort of call it a boycott or protests with keeping, some people deciding not to go across the border. How much does that actually sway policy? Is this something that will be short-lived? Is this something that has the potential to make some change? And we talked about the comments of U.S. President Donald Trump.
Are you talking about the U.S. policies?
Correct.
Unfortunately, I'm afraid that no matter what we do and what happens, Mr. Trump is not really paying attention. He's got his idea. We don't exactly know what is his main idea. Frankly, a lot of his decisions are difficult to understand for many of us. So unfortunately, I don't think tourism has that big power to change policies at the national level in the United States. But who knows? It's a matter then of the local representative of the industry, the lobbyist, to go to Washington, D.C., to lobby the Senate, to lobby the House of Representatives, and to lobby Mr. Trump.
Terry, then I'm going to come to you. You had mentioned the organization, the Beyond Borders Tourism Coalition.
Right.
It seems like it's going to be an uphill battle if you've got a president that doesn't seem to necessarily see this as a big decline. What are the challenges ahead for the coalition and sort of the group?
Well, the challenges are staying united and focused. But I think the commitment I've seen and heard from my colleagues from this Beyond Borders Coalition is very strong and very steadfast. So our responsibility to you, our partners, is to make sure we deliver that message about the economic importance of tourism, both to us and to Canada. And we will do that in early June. Some of my other associations have been up there last week. So it's a matter of what I call Operation Pester. We cannot stop. We have to stay on message and stay vigilant in how we deliver it. And one thing I wanted to touch on in addition to this is the impact to Indigenous communities in Canada and how important they are to this cultural exchange that we have between the U.S. and your country. And it's just heart-wrenching to know the kind of devastating impact that if U.S. travelers don't go to Canada, what it does to the indigenous communities. But that cultural exchange is key to what our tourism industry is all about. And I have been saying for, I don't know, the last couple of months, 2 countries, 1 community. And our community, which is Canada and U.S., has the unique opportunity to do what very few other sectors of our economy can do. And that is we bring people together and we grow and learn and celebrate the, indigenous communities, everything that makes both countries and our people special. So to me, 2 countries, 1 community, we have a responsibility to deliver to our friends, our colleagues there in Canada. And trust me, it's my job every day to do that, whether it's in DC or other places.
All right. I am going to play a clip. This is a clip from California Governor Gavin Newsom sent out a message to Canadians. Let's have a short look at this clip.
Last year, nearly 2 million Canadians visited California because here in California, we've got plenty of sunshine and a whole lot of love for our neighbors up north.
All right. So pretty much a similar sentiment as what Terry was saying, Tanya. I'm curious, given the earlier stat of 62% of Canadians saying they won't travel to the U.S. this year, how do these personal appeals and marketing tools help, or are they falling on deaf ears?
I think they're falling on deaf ears right now. I think there's a definite sense of uncertainty and confusion, and that is what's stopping a lot of people from going across. They're seeing articles, they're hearing things about travelers in the U.S. who are not having great experiences, and that leads to a narrative. And anything that leads to uncertainty or stickiness at the border really makes people think twice about going across. And I think with these tariffs too, people don't know, how much can I take into the States? How much can I bring back? So they just stop and they say, maybe it's just too confusing. I just won't go over today. And border towns, you'll see people crossing. Before this, you would see people crossing multiple times per week.
Amy?
Yeah, no, I echo those sentiments. I mean, certainly marketing campaigns, we rely heavily on to draw people into the country. But anytime there's uncertainty, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the world generally. And so people's sense of control, what can they control? Well, they can control their decision to go into the U.S. or not. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think we're seeing, as Canadians, we're an informed people, and right now they're choosing no, not right now. And so while I commend the governor for those marketing efforts, and I think you still need to find ways to reach people, at this time, I think Canadians have said, not forever, but right now I'm taking this and I'm controlling what I can and choosing not to go.
Roger?
I agree. However, one thing that I liked about the governor's message is that he's working for the long term. He may not change anything for the very short term, but you have to build relationship. And colleagues at tour operators, USTO, that you have to, through a crisis, work with your client over a long period of time. And that's how you're going to be gaining trust again and gaining respect again. So it may not do much in the short term, but for the long term, I think it's an important thing that they continue to attract the Canadian market.
And Tara, get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, we have a lot to do to reestablish our country as a welcoming country to our Canadian family.
Yeah.
So, the governor's message may not be well received at the moment, but I agree that long term, we have to be consistent in delivering that message, because we will work our way through this. But I know short term, it's going to be tough. But we need to do whatever we can to say, we value you, you're our friend, our neighbor, and we want you to come back, as well as U.S. citizens going to Canada.
Tanya, you're in a unique situation with the sort of being a small business. What supports are you asking for to help duty-free businesses?
So we understand Team Canada, we're all Team Canada, but we also understand that long term our industry is going to be really hurt. And all the border communities. So we've been asking the government, there are some small, easy regulatory measures that they can immediately put in place. They could do it today. That would really go a long way to leveling the playing field for our industry versus the U.S. competition. But I think of greater need right now. We are asking for targeted specific pandemic-like supports to weather this storm. And I really want to emphasize, we're not asking for bailouts. We're asking for fairness and a chance for this industry to survive. We've been a part of so many road trips and people's journeys over the years. We want to see this industry still here when this passes.
We are going to have to leave it there. Tanya, Amy, Terry, Frederick, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Some very insightful stuff, and hoping all the best for you, Tanya, as well. And Terry.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
It's a pleasure.
You.
Imagine being in the backwoods of Georgia with a group of neo-Nazis slaughtering a goat and drinking its blood. For Scott Payne, he doesn't have to imagine it, he lived it. He's a former undercover FBI agent, and in his new book, written with veteran journalist Shephard, he chronicles his time exposing some of America's most dangerous extremist groups. The book is called Codename Pale Horse, How I Went Undercover to Expose America's Nazis. And Scott Payne and Shephard join us now for more. Welcome to our studios, and Scott Payne, thank you so much for joining us on the line. Scott, I'm going to start with you. There's a moment in each person's life when they decide what they want to be, whether it's an astronaut, a doctor, a nurse. If they're crazy, they'll think about being a journalist. If they're even crazier, they might think about becoming an FBI agent, an undercover one at that. When did you first realize you wanted to become an undercover FBI agent?
It really started with just getting into law enforcement. I went to college, and once I took an elective in a criminal justice course, that resonated with me heavily. I was already bouncing and getting some kind of local trainings with law enforcement. Once I became a cop, after 3 years, I became a vice narcotics investigator. And that's when I was able to get certified by the state of South Carolina in undercover techniques. And that's when I started getting the bug, going out and doing my first undercover, and after that, the rest is history.
I don't want to date it, but we do have a photo of you. This is you as a beat cop here in Grenville. Michelle, you didn't know Scott, obviously, during any of this time. I'm curious, how did you first hear about Scott?
It was actually during a project that I did, a podcast with CBC about a group that was called The Base. It was a neo-Nazi group, and we did a series about the members of that group. There was a Canadian member that was part of the armed forces that was part of it. And basically the podcast was about an investigation, and we knew that during that investigation there was an undercover officer, but we had no idea who he was. We heard his voice sometimes in the court exhibits. One of the fathers of someone that we interviewed, whose son had been arrested, he said he had met him. So he said, I think this guy's name was Scott. I'm doing a terrible Southern accent there, sorry. So at that point, anyway, the podcast series goes. A few months later, we see this Rolling Stone article about an undercover agent who had been 28 years with the FBI, just retired. And the producer I was working with looks at it and she's like, that's our Scott. That's the guy who had been undercover in the case. So I reached out thinking we'd just do a bonus episode for the podcast. But once you meet Scott and you start hearing his stories, that turned into a whole other series, podcast series, and then this book.
All right, well, we have a photo of you two working together. This is both of you hard at work on the book as well. Scott, you decided to work together on the podcast and the book. I'm curious, why did you want to share that story?
I really didn't want to in the beginning.
I can imagine someone who, for the most part, you live a private life.
I didn't. I'm somewhat of a big splash kind of person, boisterous personality, but it all kind of parlayed off of the Rolling Stones article. I just had friends in the industry, entertainment industry, and I thought maybe being a consultant or helping with the show. And then the Rolling Stones article happened, and after that, the journalist of that article, Paul Solotaroff, was hounding me about literary agents reaching out to him, and I ended up talking to Brooklyn Literary and went with them, and then that's when we started interviewing possible co-writers, and that's when I met Michelle.
Michelle teased a little bit about it, about the base itself. I'm hoping you can sort of explain, who are they?
Well, they're mostly defunct now, thankfully, but the belief system is still out there. It's a relatively newer movement called accelerationism. The movement idea, the ideology was around in the 80s, but they didn't call it accelerationism. And what essentially it is it's this different type of far-right extremism, neo-Nazi. They don't believe there's a political solution to save the white race. They believe that society is going to collapse on its own or from man-made events, and they want to speed that up. And even though the base is pretty much defunct, the leader, Ronaldo Nazzaro, is still out there trying to gain some attention and recruit people, but the ideology is still there, as you've seen with recent attacks, and you hear of groups like Order of Nine Angles. That is just another level of accelerationism with satanic beliefs tied to it.
What was your first impression when you first met them?
It's different than what I usually do with my skill set, but I was kind of in work mode, so you don't. I'm just more thinking about the case and gathering intelligence, but it was a little bit shocking and surprising to me that you had 19-year-olds, 21-year-olds, even older than that didn't have a car, didn't have a job, but had an arsenal in their closet. And we're meeting at least on average, maybe monthly, to train in firearms and tactics to prepare for the collapse of society and to speed it up.
Michelle, I want to pick up on some of that. What are some of the takeaways for you when you hear about these young men, some Canadian, about what's happening sort of in our society right now?
It's really frightening. I mean, I covered terrorism for years. I was with the Toronto Star for many years, foreign correspondent, covered 9/11 and the fallout from that, and covered terrorist groups around the world. But this, and neo-Nazi groups have always been around, of course. But there, as Scott said, there's been this real rise in these groups that call themselves accelerationists. To me, it was really shocking hearing his stories, hearing the recordings of these young men, the level of anger and victimhood that these groups and these young men, that they feel.
What are they angry about?
Well, it's everything. I think they feel that society's not fair to them. They feel that the white race is being wiped out. I mean, it's some fairly traditional white supremacist views. And Scott can probably speak more on that, about exactly their belief system. But what I did find when looking at these groups, when I compare it to the other groups that I covered over the years, any of the Al-Qaeda groups, the affiliates around the world, violent extremism is the same wherever you go. Their victims are different, the people they're against are different, but essentially at its core, it's the othering of people, the hatred, and wanting to use violence to create a new world order. It really is kind of incredibly, all the manifestos I've read from various groups, they have the same kind of similar language.
Interesting. Scott, can you pick up on a little bit of that in terms of what you're seeing?
Sure. I like to kind of push it like this, and it goes right along with what Michelle's saying. Let's just look at teens being radicalized online. I infiltrated the far-right groups, and I've seen it from within there, but I have peers and mentors and friends that are working the international terrorism, radical jihadist, or far left. They're still being radicalized online, and I just like to kind of phrase it as hate begets hate. If the far left does something to do something against the right, then the right gets mad. For instance, in the base, they did a call for Operation Kristallnacht, which was kind of a repeat of something that happened under Hitler's Germany. But it was said to do that because so many of the members were being doxxed or outed, and they're losing their jobs, their family, their homes. And it was like, hey, how many brothers are going to fall before we retaliate against the left? So that's why I like to say hate begets hate. And we got to come more towards the center, in my opinion.
All right, I want to talk about a story that we introed just off the top in that introduction. This is obviously a group that sacrificed a goat in one incident. And I'm curious about what that experience was. It was a really interesting couple of chapters there, and I don't want to give too much away, but tell us a little bit more. What happened there?
That was not a good night.
It's not what you signed up for or what you thought you were signing up for.
Well, yeah, I didn't know it was going to happen, that's for sure. But there I was. It was basically what people refer to as a hate camp. We probably had 13 or so members of the base from all over the United States that came in. So we're doing tactical training, hand-to-hand combat, how to live off the land, things like that. But at some point on that first night of the hate camp, it was Halloween, and several members of the group went a few miles away and stole a ram or a goat. I don't know the difference. They both had horns. I'm not sure which one it was, but it was an ideology that they had. A lot of the members of the base they claimed to be pagan in belief, but just like white supremacy would take the Christian belief and twist it, they're taking the pagan belief and twisting it and praying to their gods. And but the idea was to kick off the wild hunt. Not in the Norse mythology terms. The wild hunt would have been the start of the collapse of society and furthering the white race and starting to eliminate non-whites from the planet and anti-fascist people from the planet.
All right, I want to talk about another investigation, one of the other big ones in the book. You go undercover for quite some time. This one is Operation Roadkill. Scott, break it down for me. What was that?
It was a 2-year. The investigation itself was longer, but I was undercover for 2 years in the Outlaws. You can see it right there behind me. That side. I'm turned around right there. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club in Massachusetts, and in a nutshell, this one particular chapter was committing all kinds of crimes. The FBI started working it as a case team, and then they interview me as a possible undercover. I get picked. I go in. It takes a long time to infiltrate. Sometimes it takes a long time to infiltrate groups, especially if you're going deep undercover. And that's what happened. And throughout the 2-year investigation, we uncovered, it started light with insurance fraud, but the case team had already seen that they were dealing drugs. We had extortions, home invasions, assaults, carjackings, you name it. It was kind of a full gamut in that case.
Now, I actually have a photo here. This is a surveillance shot from 2006 outside Lobster Fest in Massachusetts. This is with the Outlaws. There's the shirt that you're wearing, the sleeveless shirt. You've got a sling on because of an injury. I am curious, the person in the red there that's got their back, who's that?
That's Scott Town.
All right. That's who I want to talk about, because here's a person, just by looking at that photo, there are some really stark likeness to both of you right there. And I'm curious, what makes him different than you?
Not a lot. Which is why we hit it off so well. I mean, I don't have any hate in my heart for that guy. I got a lot of love in my heart, actually. It was just my job. But that friendship that I developed with him was pretty much a true friendship, to the extent of he didn't know I was an undercover FBI agent. But yeah, it was scary how much we had in common. Depending on which side you're looking at it from. On other sides, it was like, wow, this is my brother. This is my brother from another mother, you know. And I have been told from people that know him very well, after they've seen me on these interviews, they're like, man, you remind us so much of Scott. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
I am curious, how do you reconcile being his friend, having so much love in your heart, but knowing that at some point you have to arrest him? How does, after the investigation's done, you get your accolades and all of that stuff, but that's something that you have to sit with.
It's not easy. And that is something that is not usually what people think about when they think undercover, but here's the gist of it. Essentially, you are building relationships that you're going to betray, and that sucks. Sometimes you bond. I mean, if you're deep, for me personally, when I'm deep undercover, for 2 years, a year and a half, I'm bonding with somebody. I would because that's just my personality. But it's not easy. You have to be able to figure out how to rationalize in your mind how you're going to deal with that and it not have an adverse impact on your psyche. At the end of the day, am I doing my job? Yes, but I'm still human. So how do you reconcile that? Maybe it's something as simple as saying, hey, why are you doing this deal? You don't have to do it for me. You told me you got out of the business because of blah, blah, blah. Why are you doing it? And then they're like, no, man, I'm in. Don't worry about it. I'm doing it. And I'm like, okay, well, I tried.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, we should clarify that, yes, you might love him and you guys look like you guys can be brothers. You guys have very different views on sort of on a lot of things.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, crime versus not committing crime, but I mean, I'm very transparent. It's the only way I know how to be. It's the only way I want to be. I've committed all kinds of crimes before I was in law enforcement. I just didn't get arrested and convicted. Had I been, I would not be able to be a law enforcement officer.
Right.
So again, I'm not dehumanizing. A lot of times when I've arrested, well, most of the time I've ever had somebody arrested and they're sitting down at a table and I'm in front of them, I'll tell them, I'm not saying I disagree with what you did. I'm not saying I think you're a bad person. I'm saying you're an adult and you chose to break the law and you got caught. So let's start from here.
All right. Michelle, there's a number of stories that I'm sure probably didn't make the book. There's some really big stuff. I'm just curious, what part of Operation Roadkill stuck out to you the most?
I think if I had to pick a favorite case, it would be Operation Roadkill, because I found what Scott just talked about really interesting, that idea of the psychology behind how you're able to befriend and then betray. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think with the neo-Nazis and the KKK, it was harder for him to find any common ground. Mm-hmm. But with the bikers, Scott is a biker. I mean, we talked about the physical similarities. You know, and Scott often says this, you know, I ride a Harley, he rides a Harley. Right. Like, I like to drink, he likes to drink. You know, I had a baby girl daughter at the same time. He had a daughter at the same time. So he's undercover with these guys, and he's living this incredible double life that he's going back, like, because that's the thing I think people don't always realize about undercovers. You think it's a full-time job, and you're like living with them. It wasn't like that for Scott. I mean, he's 2 weeks on, he's coming back home, and we tried to sort of highlight this in the book and the podcast, like the toll that took. There's he has a crazy incident when he almost loses his life on that case, and you know, hasn't slept, up partying with them all the time, gets on a plane, comes back home and has to like go play Santa Claus, right, you know, at an FBI Christmas party with his bouncing his daughters on his lap. So, you know, like, it's just, that to me was the psychology behind it. And what was really nice working with Scott is he was really open in a way that I don't think you get all the time from law enforcement. He was, you know, to use the word vulnerable, I mean, he talked about his breakdown. He talked about psychological impact, how he had to, like, he talked about the toll it took on his marriage. His wife is incredible, and she participated and was really open on this too, you know? So I think in that there's some really important messages, because aside from the message of the book of looking at these groups and the dangers that they pose and that kind of sort of reporting side, there's also really this human side of what it takes to be someone who does this kind of work and the toll. Because you have to be very special to be able to do this. And someone like Scott, I mean, I'm not infiltrating the bikers. Nobody's going to believe, you know, I'm not infiltrating the KKK. Like, he has a special skill set that allowed him to do this. And he did, you know, incredible work over almost 3 decades.
All right, Scott, you started working right before the height of the war on terror. And I'm curious, how did that focus sort of affect what was going on domestically?
It's a good question. In the United States, well, let me just speak from working at the FBI and doing undercover type cases. I'm going where, or we as an agency are kind of going to where the crime's kind of building up. So I already had a reputation of being the biker undercover guy. There was a handful of us that did that kind of thing. We all know each other, or knew each other at that time. But then the shift starts changing, and you don't see a lot of biker cases being built or made by the FBI. And then we started seeing this, I won't say a rise in the domestic terrorism, but more of a light was being shown upon it, right? And then you get a Charlottesville happening and an innocent victim dying. And that, unfortunately, sometimes it takes a catastrophic event. Actually, most of the time, it takes a catastrophic event to swing the pendulum a certain way. And it's sad that as humans and in life that has to happen, but it drives things. And once that started, we started seeing more domestic terrorism type cases, online. It's a lot of online stuff. Like you find, let's just say that there's thousands of people on these Telegram channels or these other dark web kind of encrypted apps, and they are spewing hate all day long. But in America, spewing it's not illegal.
Right.
How do you know which one of those 1,000, if any of them, are going to be your next active shooter, are going to be the next massacre person? And that's where we have to stay vigilant and go. But everything started shifting, and then oddly enough, the skill set that applied to bikers and backwoods meth heads and everything that I was doing kind of went right into helping me be decent at doing that stuff too.
Was there any connections to January 6th, for example, in any of that stuff that you were finding?
Not a lot, and that's a big misconception that I do like to talk about. A lot of people think January 6th, they'll say white supremacy. That was not white supremacy. That's a whole different realm of anti-government. And there might have been white supremacists there, but I won't get into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories of January 6th, but that was generally anti-government. That would be your pro-gun type crowds that are now doing nefarious things to try to overthrow the government.
All right. I want to bring up something that many people remember, of course, 2017, August 11th, 12th, when white nationalists marched throughout Charlottesville, Virginia. You wrote that Americans saw what they had not seen, what you had seen, rather, a long time ago, that this was something that's sort of been brewing. What sign did we miss before that day?
That's another good question. In law enforcement, sometimes it's tough because I can look back at the early 90s in gangs. I'm in South Carolina as a cop, and you stop somebody and they say, "Oh, I'm a member of the Crips," and I'm like, "In Greenville, South Carolina, the Crips here." I'm like, "Go back to L.A." Well, I was an idiot, like a lot of us, and you have used blinders on. You're like, "Well, not in my neighborhood." And the next thing you know, it was a Crip member who relocated to South Carolina because his parents wanted him to get a better life. But what he did is come to South Carolina and create new gangs. So it's all around you. So you just have to. Michelle did a great quote in the book of the after action post review of 9/11, and it was one of the biggest misfortunes was us not having the imagination to see that something like that could happen. So you have to, you have to stay vigilant. You got to keep your eyes open.
All right, Michelle, we know both of you in different ways have been on the front lines of these hate groups. Can you offer any insight in how they've formed and whether they're unfortunately, are they getting worse?
It's a really hard question to answer because I don't know if Scott has the same view, but for me, when you are immersed in this for so many years, you just have a skewed perspective, right? I feel it's terrifying. I feel like, we are, especially right now, I feel like the division is worse. People are going more and more online, which is obviously a dangerous place. I feel like a lot of the neo-Nazi groups in the States are rebuilding. So yes, but I always caution that with again, because it's all we look at. And when you're studying this, when you're writing about this, when you're listening to all these recordings, that it does give a skewed perspective. But it's something definitely to be vigilant about for people to, people often ask ask of Scott, what's the advice that you give? It's reading this kind of, and it's not a plug for the book, but it's reading this kind of information. Like if you're a parent, looking at what your kids are looking at, just being really aware that it is out there and not putting the blinders on.
All right. Scott, I'll get your take on it. Are things getting worse?
It's hard for me to say because I'm not on the front line.
Right.
I'm retired. I'm still involved. I'm out speaking and teaching and still trying to learn. But here's what I'll tell you. The things that I saw that were a lot in common with these younger groups of the accelerationist ideology and stuff is it's a younger kid who's been bullied, who is an outcast, can't get a partner, and they have a need to belong like most humans do. And they are going online in the middle of the night, all night long, going down a rabbit hole of hate and finding like-minded brothers, but it just keeps getting darker and darker. And as I referenced earlier, it just happened in the States. A kid kills his parents, his mom and his stepdad, and was planning to do an assassination attempt. He gets arrested, but if you look, as soon as they start doing a deep dive into his stuff, he was already looking at order of 9 angles type things, and that is an accelerationist satanic group. So it's very cliche, but if you see something, say something. Try not to put the blinders on, and I'll go along with Michelle. For me, it's just sitting down and talking and just trying to get this knowledge out there.
All right, Scott, I've got one question for you, last one. After all those years, the grueling days, Michelle talked about it, sort of the toll it takes, the sacrifice on your family, on your kids, on your health, mental and physical. Was it worth it? To put yourself through all of that and seeing all of the things that you were able to accomplish and the arrests and sort of bringing focus to an issue that, as we've sort of alluded to, is still a big issue?
I say yes. I say it's worth it. Sometimes you'll find I'm like, man, if this wouldn't have happened to me, I would have never got PTSD. And then within 30 seconds, I say, but you know what? Me getting that allowed me to create this one piece of instruction that I do, and I've taught to all over the place for many years to thousands and thousands of people. So yeah, I think it's worth it. Of course, if I could do it over, I would do better as a husband and a father, and balance my life better. But it all happened for a reason, and I do believe that the things that my peers, mentors, people I've been blessed to mentor, did and do and are still doing makes a difference.
All right. Well, we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks.
Really important work and really good read. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is the agenda for Thursday, April 24th, 2025. Tomorrow, Steve Paykin and John Michael McGrath will be back with a new episode of On Poly. I'm Jane Jaganathan. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and Steve and John Michael will see you again tomorrow.